Yeah, the spike strip was handmade. Whoever built it knew exactly what they were doing, and they'd done it before. On the loneliest highway in America, a woman drives alone through a Nevada storm with her father's funeral program still folded in her coat pocket. She doesn't know the blown tire wasn't an accident. She doesn't know the darkness around her is watching. And she doesn't know that the only thing standing between her and whatever comes next is a scarred, silent biker who should terrify her, but doesn't leave. This is the story of Route 50, of the night the highway became a trap, and of the men who ride into darkness so others don't have to face it alone. If this is your kind of story, stay with us all the way to the end. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from tonight. We read every single one. Now let's go. The funeral had been at 2 in the afternoon, and by the time Elena Mercer was back on the highway, it was past 11. The Nevada desert swallowed whole by cloud cover so thick the stars had given up trying to push through. She had her father's old Camry because her own car was in the shop, a detail she'd barely registered that morning, standing in the cemetery in shoes that were wrong for soft ground, watching workers who'd seen too many funerals to be careful. Lower a pine box into earth that smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. She hadn't cried. She'd wanted to. Had stood there in the cold with her jaw set and her hands wrapped around each other inside her coat pockets, waiting for something to break open inside her chest. And nothing had. Just that hollow sound the wind makes when it moves through an empty place, filling it briefly and then moving on. That was 11 hours ago. She'd driven 2 hours north after the burial to close out her father's apartment, a one-bedroom in a town called Ely that smelled like cigarettes and old coffee and the particular stillness of a man who'd lived alone for 20 years. She'd boxed what mattered. She'd left the rest for the landlord. She'd sat on the edge of his stripped mattress for 40 minutes doing nothing at all, and then she'd gotten back in the Camry and pointed it toward the highway and started the drive home to Reno. Route 50. The loneliest road in America. That's what the signs called it. And tonight Elena believed every word. There was no traffic, there hadn't been for over an hour. The highway stretched out in the headlights like a gray tongue disappearing into the mouth of something vast and lightless, and the scrub brush on either side of the asphalt was just suggestion, shapes without detail, existing at the edge of visibility and then not existing at all. The wind had picked up, rain was coming. She could feel it in the way the air pressure had changed, that dense electrical weight that settles in before a desert storm. And the Camry's heater was making a sound it hadn't made before, a faint intermittent wheeze that her father would have called character, and that Elena, who knew what exhaustion actually looked like from 12-hour ER shifts, recognized as a machine nearing the end of its patience. She was going 63. She should have stopped in Ely, should have found a motel, gotten 8 hours, driven back in daylight when her eyes weren't doing that thing they did after too many hours of bad sleep, drifting, snapping back, drifting again. But the apartment had felt like a place she needed to leave quickly, the way you need to leave certain rooms in hospitals, rooms where the air has gone heavy with something final, and she'd told herself the drive was only 4 hours and she'd done longer on worse nights after longer shifts, and that had all seemed true when she'd said it to herself standing in the parking lot in Ely. It seemed considerably less true now. The blowout announced itself without preamble. One moment the car was tracking straight, 63 miles an hour, the heater wheezing, the radio doing nothing useful at the edge of signal range. And then there was a sound like a gunshot under the chassis, and the Camry lurched hard left, steering wheel snapping in her hands with a violence she wasn't prepared for. Elena held on through sheer muscle memory, nursing it down from 60 to 40 to 20, the car shuddering and pulling, and she got it off the asphalt onto the gravel shoulder and brought it to a stop before she fully understood what had happened. She sat in the driver's seat with the engine still running and both hands still gripping the wheel, breathing. The rain started. Not politely, just suddenly there, hammering the roof of the Camry in sheets, the wipers snapping back and forth against a volume of water they weren't designed for. Elena checked her phone. 1 bar. She tried calling twice and watched it fail both times before the bar disappeared entirely, the signal collapsing the way everything seemed to collapse tonight, one thing after another, quietly and without drama, just not working anymore. She got out into the rain. The rear driver's side tire was destroyed. Not just flat, shredded. The rubber peeled back from the rim in strips. And when Elena crouched in the rain with her phone's flashlight and looked more carefully, she saw it, caught inside the wreckage of the tire, half buried in the torn rubber. Metal. A section of steel spike welded to a bar, the kind of thing you'd need a workshop to build, and a reason to build it. She straightened up slowly. The road was empty in both directions. The rain fell without sound effects, without atmosphere, just massive and indifferent and cold, soaking through her coat in the time it took her to stand up. She looked east. She looked west. Nothing. The desert did what desert does in rain, which is absorb it without comment, the scrub brush dark and low and the road ahead swallowed by weather and distance and dark. Elena Mercer had worked emergency rooms for 9 years. She'd seen car accidents and overdoses and domestic violence and the particular specific damage that humans do to each other when they stop pretending. She knew what adrenaline felt like when it arrived without asking, that cold chemical clarity, the way peripheral noise drops away and the body focuses down to the thing directly in front of it. She felt it now, standing in the rain on Route 50, holding a piece of handmade road spike in her wet hand, alone in the dark. Someone had put this here deliberately, and they'd put it here to stop someone. She got back in the car. The spare was in the trunk. She'd confirmed that much from muscle memory, the procedural habit of a woman who'd spent years making fast decisions in bad conditions. But she'd never changed a tire in her life. Her father had always been the one who... She stopped that thought. Put it somewhere flat and back from the edge. She found the hazard lights switch and turned them on, orange light strobing into the rain, and then she sat in the front seat with the rain beating the roof and tried to work the problem with what she had. No signal, no traffic, road spike in the tire, dark in every direction, possible miles until the next town or gas station. And she had no idea how many because she hadn't been looking at the distance markers, and her phone's map had cached itself at the last strong signal, which was somewhere back near Austin. She was still sitting with that when she heard it. It came from the east, from the direction she'd been traveling away from. A low rumble that the rain couldn't quite swallow, a mechanical sound that grew steadily from suggestion to certainty over the span of maybe 30 seconds. And then the headlight appeared. Single headlight, high and bright, and the rumble resolved itself into the specific, unmistakable sound of a large displacement motorcycle engine, low and rolling and deliberately unhurried, the kind of sound that a Harley-Davidson makes when it's being ridden by someone with no particular reason to hurry. Elena watched the headlight approach in her side mirror. It slowed as it neared her hazard lights, slowed further, and then it pulled up behind her on the gravel shoulder and stopped, the engine dropping to an idle and then cutting, the headlight extinguishing, and the sudden relative silence was occupied entirely by rain. She watched in the mirror as the rider dismounted. He was big. She registered that first, the way height and width combined into a specific silhouette that the human brain categorizes automatically and involuntarily, particularly in the dark, particularly alone. He wore a helmet that he pulled off and hung from a handlebar with the practiced motion of 1,000 previous stops. He wore a leather vest over a dark jacket, and even from 30 feet and through a rain-streaked mirror she could see the patches, the insignia of a motorcycle club she didn't recognize, didn't know, but whose presence communicated something before he'd taken a single step toward her car. He walked toward her driver's side window. Unhurried. Boots on wet gravel, a sound she could hear despite the rain. He stopped a few feet from the door and stood there without knocking, without leaning down to look in, just standing in the rain and waiting, and Elena thought, with the part of her brain that processed risk for a living, he's stopped far enough back that I don't feel crowded. He's not performing friendliness. He's just waiting. She rolled the window down 2 inches. He was older than she'd expected, late 40s, maybe older, face weathered in the specific way that came from time outdoors rather than time indoors worrying. A scar ran along his jawline on the left side, old and well-healed. His eyes were dark and very still. He looked at her for a moment, then looked at the destroyed rear tire without comment, then looked back at her. Blowout? His voice was low and flat. Not gentle, not threatening, just a voice that didn't waste itself. Yes. A pause. Rain between them. Spare? I have one. I don't know how to change it. Another pause. He looked at the tire again. Something shifted in his expression. Not much, barely perceptible. But Elena, who read faces for a living, caught it. He looked back at her. Pop the trunk. She hesitated. 9 years of emergency medicine had taught her what danger looked like, the specific body language of men whose intentions ran sideways, and this man wasn't showing her that. But he also wasn't showing her warmth or reassurance or any of the social lubricant that people normally produced in these situations, and his absence of performance was somehow more unsettling than aggression would have been. He simply stood in the rain, waiting for her to make a decision, apparently indifferent to which way it went. She popped the trunk. He moved around the car without another word. She heard the trunk open, heard the sounds of the spare and the jack being removed, heard the particular sequence of noises that meant someone who'd done this before was doing it efficiently. Elena sat in the driver's seat with her hand near the door handle and her phone in her lap and watched him work in the rearview mirror. His name was Cade Rourke. She didn't know that yet. She didn't know anything about him except the patches on his vest, the skull and crown insignia that meant nothing to her, and the practiced economy of a man who moved through the world without apologizing for the space he took up. He'd been riding Route 50 for the same reason he rode most of the high desert routes through Nevada at night, because night riding in open country was the only time his head went quiet. He'd done 2 tours, Iraq first, then Afghanistan. He'd come home to a country that had been uniformly gracious in abstract and largely absent in specific. Plenty of yellow ribbons, very few return calls. He'd been a mechanic before the army, and he went back to it after, found a shop in a small town outside of Reno run by a man named Ortega, who'd also done time downrange, and who didn't ask about the silences or the nightmares or the way Cade sometimes stared at exit doors and counted them. He'd found the Iron Covenant the same way most men found it, sideways, through necessity, through the particular brotherhood that forms between people who've stopped being able to explain what's wrong with them to people who haven't been there. None of that was visible from the front seat of a Camry in the rain. What was visible was a large, scarred man in club colors crouching beside a destroyed tire. And what Elena was managing, inside the careful composure she'd constructed over years of ER shifts, was the specific cold fear of a woman alone on a dark road who had not yet decided whether the thing that had arrived was help or the next disaster. He had the destroyed tire off in under 6 minutes. He worked without light, no flashlight, the rain still falling hard, working entirely from feel and memory. Elena watched him set the tire aside on the gravel, and that's when he stopped. Just stopped, tire in his hands, and looked at it. She watched his stillness. He set the tire down slowly. He crouched over it, and she could see from his posture that he was examining something, running his hand along the interior of the destroyed rubber. And then he stood up and walked to her window again, carrying something in his right hand. He held it up in the dim orange pulse of the hazard lights. The piece of spike strip was about 8 inches long, bent now where the tire had destroyed around it, but clearly constructed. Welded joints, deliberate design, not something that ended up on a highway by accident. "You know this was in your tire," he said. Not a question. "Yes." His eyes stayed on her face. "You find it after the blowout." "Yes." "Anybody else out here when it happened?" "No." He looked east down the empty highway, then west. His jaw worked once, very slightly, and then he was moving, back around the car, finishing with the spare, and she heard the jack working faster now, the sounds sharper, and Elena's adrenaline, which had briefly leveled off, climbed back up the scale and stayed there, because someone had built that spike strip, and they'd put it on this road, and if they'd built one, they hadn't built one. She was scanning the darkness on both sides of the highway when the headlights appeared. Coming from the west, low, truck height, moving slowly, far too slowly for a vehicle just passing through on a highway, slowing further as they got close, until the truck was crawling and then stopping. Just stopping, 200 yards west, headlights cutting through the rain without moving. Cade had seen them before Elena had. He walked back to her window. He'd put the spare on. His hands were wet and dark with road grime, and he wiped them on the outside of his jeans without looking at them, eyes on the stopped truck. "Window up," he said. "What's window up?" Don't get out, whatever happens. He looked at her for exactly 1 second. You understand me? She rolled the window up. He walked toward the truck. He didn't walk fast. He didn't walk slow. He walked the way he'd done everything since he'd arrived, with the particular unhurried deliberateness of a man who'd been in enough situations where rushing got people killed. Boots on wet asphalt. The rain hadn't stopped. The hazard lights kept pulsing behind him, orange intervals, his shadow stretching and contracting. The truck sat with its engine running. Elena could see two figures in the cab, just shapes behind glass and rain. She could see them watching Cade approach, could see the particular motionlessness of men deciding something. Cade stopped 15 feet from the truck's front bumper. He didn't say anything, didn't gesture, just stood there in the rain in his cut, arms at his sides, looking at the cab. The driver's window came down. A man leaned out, 40s, rough face, the kind of smile that doesn't connect to anything behind it. You folks having some trouble? The voice carried clearly in the rain-wet air. Cade said nothing. We saw the hazards, the man said. Thought we'd stop and help out. She's handled, Cade said. A pause. The man looked past Cade toward the Camry. Is that right? She looked like she was by herself. She's not. The smile stayed. We got tools in the bed, happy to drive on. The words were flat as concrete. The man in the truck looked at Cade for a long moment, looked at the patches on his vest, looked at his face, and something passed through his expression. Not fear exactly, but its first cousin, the recalibration that happened when the situation turned out to contain something the math hadn't accounted for. The window went back up. 30 seconds passed. Then the truck started moving, west, back the way it had come, taillights disappearing slowly into the rain. Cade watched until they were gone. Then he stood there another 30 seconds in the rain, looking at the empty highway. Elena watched him from the car and felt, with the part of her that processed threat for a living, that the truck driving away was not the end of something. It was a pause. It was two men going somewhere to make a phone call. Cade walked back to the car. He stopped at her window and she rolled it down 2 inches again. Spares on, he said. Don't push it past 50. You got a destination? Reno. He looked at the highway west. At nothing. At the dark where the truck had gone. Then back at her. I'm going to ride behind you, he said. Keep moving. You stop for nothing and nobody until you see gas station lights or you hit traffic. You understand? Elena looked at him. Who were those men? People who don't need a reason. That's not an answer. He looked at her with those still dark eyes, and something moved through them. Not softness, not reassurance, but the specific acknowledgement of one person to another that the situation is exactly as bad as it appears, and that pretending otherwise helps no one. No, he said, it's not. He walked back to his Harley. Elena heard the engine turn over, that low rolling rumble filling the rain-soaked dark again, and she put the Camry in drive and pulled back onto Route 50 and began moving west. And in her rearview mirror, the single headlight of Cade Rourke's motorcycle held steady 30 feet behind her bumper, close enough to see, close enough to matter. She drove. He followed. The rain fell without letting up. She was 7 miles down the road, doing 48, watching the highway unroll in the headlights, when she looked in the rearview mirror and saw it. Not Cade's headlight, which was still there, still steady, but behind it, further back in the dark, the unmistakable twin headlights of a pickup truck falling into position behind them both. And then, to the left of the highway, on a dirt road she hadn't noticed, a second set of lights appeared, angling toward the asphalt, beginning to move to intercept. They hadn't gone to make a phone call. They'd gone to get more people. Elena's hands tightened on the wheel. The second set of headlights was still angling off the dirt road, moving to cut the highway maybe a quarter mile ahead. She did the math the way she did triage math, fast, without sentiment. 2 vehicles behind, one cutting in from the left, Cade's motorcycle between her and the trucks to the rear. A spare tire rated for surface streets doing 48 on open desert highway. The nearest town somewhere ahead in the dark, distance unknown. She pressed the accelerator. The Camry climbed to 53 and the spare tire started making a sound she didn't like. A low rhythmic complaint from the rear axle that she felt in the seat back as much as heard through the car. She pressed anyway. 55. The sound got worse. She pressed. In the mirror, Cade's headlight surged forward as he read her speed change. He came up closer, 20 feet off her bumper now, and she could see in the mirror that he'd turned his head to check behind them, a brief rotation, and then he was looking forward again at the dirt road lights moving to intercept. The truck from the dirt road hit the asphalt hard, fishtailing slightly on the wet blacktop before the driver corrected. It settled into the eastbound lane and sat there, blocking. Stationary. Headlights on high. Waiting. Elena hit the brakes. The Camry skidded on wet asphalt and she fought it, brought it straight, bled the speed down to 30, and then Cade was beside her. He'd come up on her left, accelerating past her driver's side, and he was moving toward the blocking truck without slowing, and she wanted to yell something at him through glass and rain, and she didn't because there was nothing useful to yell. He stopped his Harley in the middle of the highway, 15 feet from the blocking truck's front bumper, engine idling. Just stopped there, rain coming down on him, and the highway was narrow enough and the scrub brush on the shoulders close enough that the truck couldn't go around without going into the desert. A long moment of nothing, just engine sounds and rain. The driver's door of the blocking truck opened. 2 men got out. Not from the same side, one from the driver's side, one from the passengers, both moving at the same time with the coordination of people who'd done this particular thing before. The driver was the same man who'd smiled at Cade earlier. The passenger was younger, heavier, wearing a canvas work jacket dark with rain, and he had something in his right hand that caught the headlight glare for half a second. Metal, short, a length of pipe or a bar. Cade didn't move, didn't shift on the bike, didn't reach for anything, didn't alter the angle of his body. He sat on the Harley with both hands on the handlebars and watched the 2 men come toward him with the specific patience of someone who'd learned that moving too soon was its own kind of mistake. "Second time tonight," the driver said, loud enough to carry through the rain. "Starting to feel personal." Cade said nothing. "We're just trying to help out." The smile again, loose and practiced. "Lady's got a bad tire. Desert's no place for a woman alone." "She's not alone." "She's going to be." The driver stopped about 8 feet away. The passenger had angled out to Cade's right, a slow flanking move, and Cade's eyes moved to track him without his head moving much. "You know what I think? I think you picked up a stray, good Samaritan thing, noble." The driver's voice carried absolutely no heat, which was worse than if it had. "But this isn't your road, brother, and she isn't your problem." "Keep calling me brother," Cade said. "See how that lands." The driver looked at the patches on Cade's vest. Something moved through his face. Not the recalibration from before, something harder. The recalibration had been a man encountering unexpected weight in a situation. This was a man who'd already decided the weight didn't matter. "Iron Covenant," the driver said, reading the patch. "You're a long way from your people." "Not as far as you think." A pause. Rain on asphalt. The passenger with the pipe was 7 feet to Cade's right now and still moving, slow and sideways. And Cade tracked him with peripheral vision and waited. And Elena, watching from inside the Camry, with her foot hovering over the accelerator and her heart doing something she hadn't felt since a multi-car accident had rolled 4 patients into her ER bay simultaneously, understood that she was watching a man hold a situation together through sheer stillness and that the stillness was costing him something. The driver looked back at the trucks behind Elena's car, signal passing between them. She couldn't see what, just the slight turn of his head and then back. He reached a decision. "Move the bike," he said. "No." The word was quiet and absolute, and it landed in the wet air between them like a dropped weight, and the driver nodded once, slowly, the nod of a man closing a door on a room full of options, and said, "All right." He came forward. What happened next was fast enough that Elena only reconstructed it afterward. Cade came off the bike to the left, not away from the driver, but into him, inside the reach of the first swing, and his right hand connected with something, and the driver went down hard on the wet asphalt, and the Harley, no longer balanced, toppled to the right between Cade and the second man, which put 45 feet of motorcycle between them for 2 critical seconds. Cade stepped back over the bike, kept himself between Elena's car and both men, and stood there breathing through his nose with his right hand at his side and blood on his knuckles. And the driver was on his hands and knees on the highway, and the second man had stopped. The pipe was still in the second man's hand. He looked at the driver on the ground. He looked at Cade. He looked at the pipe. He made the calculation. He didn't move. "Pick him up," Cade said. Put him in the truck. Drive east. The second man looked at the trucks behind Elena's Camry. Cade followed his gaze. The trucks hadn't moved. 4 headlights, stationary, maybe 150 yards back, waiting. How many? Cade said. Not to Elena. To the man in front of him. Not a question. An inventory request, flat and operational. The man said nothing. Cade looked at the trucks, looked back at the man. 4? 6? Silence. Doesn't matter, Cade said, and bent down to ride his motorcycle, a movement that required taking his eyes off both men briefly. Elena held her breath during those 3 seconds. And then the Harley was upright, and he swung a leg over it, and the engine turned over, and he looked at the driver, who'd gotten to his feet and was standing in the rain with one hand on his jaw and murder in his eyes, and said, "Last time, east." The driver spat on the asphalt, looked at Elena's car, looked at Cade. "You don't know what you're in the middle of," the driver said. "Don't need to. There's more of us than you're thinking." There always is. The driver got back in the truck. The passenger followed. The truck reversed off the highway onto the shoulder, not east, just off the road, and sat there with the engine running and the headlights pointed at them, and Cade came back alongside Elena's car and rapped twice on her window, sharp and fast. She rolled it down. "We move," he said. "Now, fast as the tire holds." "They're not leaving." "No, they're not." He looked at her through the 2 inches of window gap, rain coming down between them. "You got anyone in Reno you can call when you get signal?" "I'm a nurse. I know people." Something in his face shifted, just slightly, just briefly. Not surprise, more like a small piece of information filed away in a place that mattered. "Call them when you get bars. Tell them Route 50, mile marker area. You know where you blew out?" "Somewhere past Austin. I didn't see the marker." "Roughly mile 150, 160 range." He looked back at the trucks, at the ones behind them and the one on the shoulder. "Don't stop. Don't slow down for anything on the road that isn't a traffic light or another vehicle that looks normal. Piece of debris, dead animal, anything else. You drive through it." She understood what he wasn't saying. Another spike strip. They'd built one. They'd build another. "What are you going to do?" she asked. He looked at her, rain on his face, the scar along his jaw, those still dark eyes. "Keep up," he said. He pulled ahead of her. She put the Camry in drive. They drove. The trucks followed, all of them. The one from the shoulder merged back onto the highway. The 2 from behind resumed their position, and for a while it was a convoy of the wrong kind. Elena's Camry, with its failing spare, Cade's Harley leading by 30 feet, and 3 sets of headlights maintaining distance behind them. The rain didn't stop. The highway curved gradually through low ridges, and the darkness on both sides was absolute. No ranch lights, no power lines, nothing to indicate that other people existed anywhere in this desert. Cade had his phone out, she noticed. Riding one-handed in the rain, holding the phone low, checking it, putting it away. Checking it again. She understood he was watching for signal the same way she was, had been, and understanding that meant he was doing the same math she was about what happened if they didn't get help before whatever the men in the trucks decided to do next. She'd been doing her own math. They'd built the spike strip. That meant they'd scouted this stretch of road. That meant they had a specific geography in mind, a section long enough from any town that a stranded vehicle would sit for hours before anyone official came by. That meant they'd done this before and knew the landscape. That meant somewhere ahead on this road there was probably a point they'd designated as optimal, a place where the highway geography or the distance from help, or both, made the trap complete. And they were riding toward it right now, with 3 trucks herding them. And Elena didn't say any of this because saying it didn't help, but she thought it with the cold clinical precision she used for the worst moments in the ER, and her foot stayed on the accelerator and her hand stayed on the wheel. 12 miles in, Cade's brake light flashed. She slowed automatically, matching him, and then she saw what he'd seen. Another set of headlights, ahead and stationary, pulled to the side of the road but positioned in a way that narrowed the usable lane, not blocking completely, just narrowing. And beside the vehicle a figure stood with something in his hand that might have been a road flare or might have been something else. And as they got closer, Elena saw the thing in his hand wasn't a flare. It was a light bar, the kind of orange safety light that construction workers carried, the kind of thing that told your reflexes to slow down and pull toward the shoulder and approach with caution, the kind of thing that, if you weren't thinking clearly, looked like an accident scene. Cade went past it without slowing. Elena followed, close enough that she saw the man's face as she went by. 40s, work-worn, the same quality as the others, and his expression as they blew past without stopping was not surprise but recalculation, and she watched in her rearview mirror as he raised the light bar and waved it, a signal to the trucks behind them, and one of the trucks began to accelerate. The Camry's spare was making noises that scared her. Every time she pushed past 50, the rear felt loose, a wobble in the wheels she could feel through the seat, and she knew enough about cars. Her father had taught her the basics, if not the practice, to know that a spare tire pushed past its limits didn't blow the way a regular tire blew. It came apart, and when it came apart at highway speed, it would take the car with it. She pushed past 50 anyway. 52, 54. The accelerating truck behind was gaining. Cade had seen it. He pulled his Harley sideways, literally brought it across the lane, slowing hard, forcing Elena to slow as well, and the truck behind them was closing fast, and she didn't understand what he was doing until he steadied the bike directly behind her rear bumper, tight enough that the truck couldn't come between them, using the motorcycle as a buffer, a moving shield between her and the 2 tons of steel trying to cut the distance. The truck slowed, not stopped. Slowed. Paced them. 40 feet back, 40 feet maintained, and Elena thought, they don't want to hit Cade's bike. They want to push us to a specific spot. They're directing us, not destroying us. That was almost worse. Her phone lit up. 2 bars. She grabbed it one-handed, keeping her eyes on the highway, and dialed the only number she could think of that might help. Marcus Webb, a Reno PD detective she'd treated 8 months ago for a knife wound, and who had left his card with a specific instruction: anything that feels wrong, call this number. It rang 4 times. She watched the bars. 1 bar, 1 bar. Went to voicemail. Marcus, this is Elena Mercer. I'm on Route 50 westbound, somewhere between Austin and Fallon. I have men following me in trucks. There was a spike strip in my tire. I think it was deliberate. The signal dropped. 1 bar to 0. I have a biker, an Iron Covenant member. He's keeping them back, but the call died. She didn't know if any of it had gone through. Cade's brake light flashed once, twice, pattern, deliberate, and she didn't know what it meant. She maintained her speed and watched him, and the flashes came again, twice more, and she thought, he's trying to communicate. He wants me to do something. She didn't know what. A mile later, she found out. A dirt road appeared on the right, a ranch access road cutting into the scrub brush, and Cade's turn signal came on. His actual turn signal, the tiny orange blink of it, almost absurd in context. And he slowed and made the turn without braking hard, smooth, and deliberate. And Elena followed instinctively, turning off the highway onto the dirt road. And the Camry's suspension complained immediately about the uneven surface, but she followed his taillight in the dark. The trucks didn't turn. She watched in the mirror. They kept going on the highway, brake lights in the distance, and then the dirt road curved right and she lost sight of them. Cade stopped. She stopped. He cut his engine. Silence. Rain on brush. Rain on the car roof. The smell of wet desert and the ticking of the cooling engine. He got off the bike and came to her window. Off your headlights. She switched them off. Darkness. Engine off. She hesitated. Engine off meant committed. Engine off meant trusting this man she'd known for 40 minutes in the dark on a road she didn't know, cutting herself off from her only mobility. She looked at him through 2 inches of window. He looked back. She turned the engine off. They sat in the dark. Cade stood at her window, not moving, facing back the way they'd come, and Elena listened and heard nothing except rain, and then, distantly, growing, the sound of vehicles on the highway moving east, moving past the dirt road, moving away. They sat with it until the sound was completely gone. They'll turn around, Cade said. I know. He was quiet. She could hear him breathing, not fast, not calm exactly, but controlled. The specific breath pattern of someone managing something internal. He looked at the dirt road ahead, dark, and unpromising, disappearing into brush. "This goes about 2 miles," he said. "Old ranch property. There's a building at the end that's been empty 3-4 years. Roof solid." She looked at him. "You've been here before?" Not a question. He'd known about this turnoff, known about the building. "Yes," he said. She waited. He didn't expand on it. Rain in the silence. "Who are those men?" Elena said. "And I need you to actually answer that." He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to. Then, "They work a stretch of highway, Route 50, plus some of the ranch roads out of Austin. They've been doing it a while." He looked at her. "You're not the first." The cold that moved through her chest wasn't from the rain. "How many?" she said. "That we know of? 3 women. One's okay. One's in a hospital. One—" He stopped. "One what?" He looked at the highway, at nothing visible in the dark. "One nobody found in time." Elena sat with that. "The police," she started. 3 separate jurisdictions out here. Reports were filed." His voice hadn't changed, hadn't risen or tightened. It delivered the information with the same flatness he used for everything. "They're still investigating." "How long?" 14 months. She understood suddenly and completely the specific anger that came with watching something drag through institutions while the harm continued. She'd felt it in the ER. The domestic violence case that came back 3 times. The child who came in twice before anyone from child services answered the call. The specific exhaustion of systems that processed suffering at their own pace while the suffering did not pause. "And you?" Elena said. "Why do you know all this?" He looked at her, the scarred jaw, the still eyes. "Because the one they didn't find," he said. "She was 23 years old. She was driving home from Eli. She'd been visiting her grandfather." A pause, short. "She was a prospect's kid sister." Silence. Rain. "Iron Covenant," Elena said, understanding shifting into place. "We've been running Route 50 for 8 months, rotating shifts, looking for them." He looked at the dirt road ahead. "Tonight's the first time they showed themselves." Elena looked at her hands on the steering wheel, thought about the spike strip, thought about being alone on this road without signal and without this man, thought about a 23-year-old on the same highway. "They know what you're doing," she said. "They let you ride the road, and they've been watching you." He turned and looked at her, and in his expression, for the first time, was something that wasn't stillness, something that was the specific look of a man hearing a thing he'd already known but hadn't wanted said out loud. "Yeah," he said. "This wasn't them being careless tonight. This wasn't them getting surprised. No. They chose tonight. They chose this stretch. They knew you were out here." She met his eyes. "They wanted you here. They wanted you to follow me off the highway." The silence stretched. She watched it land on him, watched the processing happen behind those still dark eyes, watched a man who'd spent 8 months running patrols on a highway understand that the thing he'd been hunting had spent 8 months watching him in return, learning his patterns, and had finally decided it was time to end it, and had used her, a woman alone with a blown tire, as the mechanism. She wasn't just stranded, she was bait, and Cade Rourke had followed her off the highway onto a dark ranch road in the rain, and the trucks had driven east, not away, never away, but east to the highway intersection, where if someone knew this dirt road, they would know it only had one way in and one way out, and they were sitting at the end of a dead end in the dark with no signal and no backup and the engine off, and the sound of trucks coming back down the highway was already starting, low at first, barely distinguishable from rain, and then clearer, engine sounds slowing, and the distant cut of headlights swinging off the highway onto the dirt road behind them. Coming in. Cade was already moving, back to his bike, and Elena's hand found the ignition key, and she turned it, and the Camry's engine turned over once, coughed, turned over again, and caught, and the headlights came back on and lit up the dirt road ahead. 2 miles of rough track, a dead end, a building that had been empty for years. And behind them, 2 sets of headlights had entered the ranch road and were coming, and there was no way past them, and the highway was blocked, and whatever was at the end of the dirt road was all they had. Cade pulled alongside her window one final time, engine loud in the confined dark. His face was different now, still controlled, still quiet, but underneath the quiet was something she recognized from the worst hours in the ER, the look of a person who has done the math and arrived at a number smaller than they needed, and who has decided to act anyway. "Stay behind me," he said. "Whatever you see at the building, don't stop, don't get out. You keep the engine running." Cade, Arachi. She said his name without knowing she knew it. She'd read it off the patch, the road name below the Iron Covenant crest. "How many of them are at the building?" He looked at her. The headlights behind them were 300 yards down the dirt road and moving. "I don't know," he said. It was the first time he hadn't had an answer, and somehow that was the most frightening thing he'd said all night. The building at the end of the dirt road was a ranch equipment barn, and it was not empty. Elena saw the light first. Not the clean white of working electricity, but the orange-yellow of generator power, leaking through the gaps in the barn's wooden siding in thin, dirty lines. Then she saw the vehicles. 3 trucks parked around the structure's east side, angled in, not parked the way people parked when they arrived somewhere, but positioned the way people positioned vehicles when they wanted to control sightlines. And then she saw the man standing in front of the barn's main doors with a flashlight and a rifle slung across his chest, and she understood that Cade's count of how many men were here had been wrong not through negligence, but because this had never been about the highway at all. The highway was the front door. This barn was the destination. Cade stopped his Harley 30 yards from the barn and put his foot down and sat there, engine idling, and Elena braked the Camry to a stop behind him and left it running the way he'd told her to. And for a moment the only sounds were rain on the barn roof and the idle of the Harley and the engine sounds of the trucks coming down the dirt road behind them, still 2 minutes out but closing. The man at the barn door raised the flashlight and put the beam on Cade, then moved it to Elena's car, then back to Cade. He didn't raise the rifle. He didn't need to. The rifle's presence was the communication. Its raising would have been redundant. Another man came around the side of the barn, then a third from the far tree line, the scrub brush on the barn's west side, where someone had been standing in the rain for long enough to be soaked through. 3 visible. The trucks behind them carrying at least 2 each. Cade turned his head slightly, not looking back at her, looking sideways, the peripheral sweep of someone accounting for all angles without advertising which angle concerned him most. His engine was still running. She watched his hands on the handlebars. He hadn't moved toward anything, hadn't dismounted. Just sitting there, rain on his shoulders, and Elena had the sudden specific thought that she was watching a man calculate how many people he could get through and in what order, running the arithmetic of an impossible situation with the particular focused quiet of someone who'd been in impossible situations before. Then the barn door opened from inside. The man who walked out was not like the others. He was in his 60s, compact and unhurried, wearing a canvas jacket that fit him well, and boots that were clean despite the mud everywhere else. His hair was silver and cut short, and his face was the kind of face that had been handsome once and had settled into something harder. Controlled, precise. The face of a man who'd learned that expressions were tools and deployed them accordingly. He walked out into the rain without appearing to notice it, and he looked at Cade's motorcycle for a moment, and then at Elena's car, and then he did something the other men hadn't done. He smiled. Not the practiced predator smile of the driver from before. Something quieter than that. Almost genuine. "Grim," he said. Cade's hands tightened on the handlebars. A small movement. The first involuntary thing Elena had seen from him. "You know my road name," Cade said. "I know considerably more than that." The older man stopped 10 feet from Cade's front wheel. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. "I know you've been running Route 50 since April. Rotating schedule. 4 riders, 2 nights on, 1 night off. I know you made 3 reports to the Lander County Sheriff's Office, 2 to the Nevada State Police, and 1 to a field contact at the FBI field office in Las Vegas." A pause. "I know the contact in Las Vegas forwarded your information to a division supervisor named Holt, who filed it and did nothing." Rain fell between them. "Who are you?" Cade said. "My name is Gerald Vaus." He said it the way people said names that had weight in certain rooms, not announcing it, just placing it. This stretch of Route 50 has been a business corridor for 11 years, long before your club started paying attention to it. He looked at Elena's car, at Elena visible through the rain-streaked windshield. You picked up something that wasn't meant for you tonight, Grim. The nurse was meant to come here on her own. The cold in Elena's chest became something structural, something that affected her breathing. Her own, Cade repeated. She was supposed to be alone on the road. That's the point. They're always alone. You complicated that. Faust looked back at Cade without anger, without urgency. The absence of both was worse than either. I'm a practical man. I don't need complications. What do you do with them? Cade said. The ones you bring here. Faust looked at him for a long moment. They move on, he said, to other places, other lives. The pause was calibrated, precise. Most of them. The trucks from the dirt road had arrived behind Elena's Camry. She heard the doors opening, heard boots on wet ground. She counted in the mirror, 2 from the first truck, 2 from the second, and they spread out without being told, flanking positions, the specific wordless coordination of people who'd done this many times. 7 men now, visible. Faust in front, 3 at the barn, 4 from the trucks, 1 Cade Rourke between Elena and all of it. Here's what I'm offering, Faust said. You walk away. Your club walks away. Whatever you think you've been doing on this highway for 8 months, you stop. He tilted his head slightly. I understand the girl who died was connected to one of your people. That was regrettable. An error on the part of men who are no longer working for me. A pause. It won't happen again. Cade said nothing. His engine was still running. In exchange, Faust continued, you get back on Route 50 and you ride east, and in the morning you call your contacts and you tell them the threat has resolved and you'll be standing down your patrol. The nurse goes where she was going. He looked at Elena's car again. Tonight becomes something she'll spend years trying to believe didn't happen. Elena watched Cade's profile, the jaw, the scar, the rain on his face. And if I say no, Cade said. Faust looked at the men around them, looked at Cade. Then this gets resolved in a way that's worse for everyone, and your club goes back to Reno without you, and the highway stays exactly as it's been for 11 years. He spread his hand slightly, a small, reasonable gesture. You've been a problem for 8 months. I've been here for 11 years. Do the math. A long silence. Then Cade's hand moved to his jacket pocket. Every man in the yard tensed. The one with the rifle raised it part way. Faust didn't flinch, just watched with that controlled, precise expression. And Cade's hand came out of the pocket holding his phone. He looked at it, looked at the screen. No signal, Faust said. We're thorough. Cade looked at the phone for another moment. Then he looked at Elena's car. A long look, through the windshield, through the rain, and she couldn't see his expression clearly from where she sat, but something in the angle of his head communicated something she couldn't name. He looked back at Faust. The girl, Cade said. The 23-year-old. Her name was Amber Reyes. Something moved through Faust's face, too fast to categorize. Her grandfather lives in Ely, Cade said. She was visiting him. He paused. Same reason the nurse was in Ely tonight. Elena's hands went cold on the steering wheel. They're not connected, Faust said. No. Cade looked at Elena's car. At Elena. Something in his expression, she could see it now from 30 yards in the rain and the dirty generator light. Something that was not quite guilt but occupied the same address. But she told me she was closing out her father's apartment in Ely. A pause. Her father's name. Elena understood before he said it. What was it? She said. But she was inside the car and her window was up and no one could hear her. Robert Mercer, Cade said. Her father was Robert Mercer. Faust went very still. Bobby Mercer, Cade said. Drove a truck on this corridor for 4 years. Stopped driving it about 2 years ago. Nobody from your operation has seen him since. The barn, the lights, the vehicle's position to control sight lines. Faust's immediate recognition of Cade's road name and his 8-month patrol schedule. The FBI contact in Las Vegas who'd filed and done nothing. Elena's father had driven trucks on this road. Elena's father had stopped, suddenly, 2 years ago. Elena's father had never told her why he'd moved to Ely, why he'd quit driving, why he'd spent the last 2 years of his life in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled like cigarettes, and the particular stillness of a man living inside a secret. Elena's hand found the door handle. Cade said, without turning, loud enough to carry, "Stay in the car." She stayed. She didn't know how. Her body wanted to be out of the car, wanted to cross those 30 yards of wet mud and be in that conversation, and she held herself in the seat through something that wasn't quite will. More like the residual reflex of a woman who'd spent 9 years being told that losing control in the middle of a crisis helped no one, and had finally internalized it so completely it functioned even when the crisis was personal. Her father. Her father who'd called her 3 weeks ago and said, "Elena, I need to tell you something," and she'd been post-shift and exhausted, and she'd said, "Dad, can it wait until Sunday?" And he'd said, "Yes, it can wait." And he died 4 days later of a heart attack in his apartment, and nobody had found him for 2 days, and whatever he'd needed to tell her had gone with him. Whatever he'd needed to tell her was in this barn. Vaus looked at Cade with an expression that had shed the controlled precision and become something rawer. Not fear, not quite, but the thing adjacent to fear that powerful men felt when a situation revealed hidden dimensions. "Bobby Mercer is dead," Vaus said. "Natural causes," Cade said. 3 weeks ago." "Yes. He drove this corridor for 4 years, carried cargo for you." A pause. "He was a contractor. And 2 years ago he stopped and moved to Ely, and apparently spent 2 years trying to figure out how to tell someone what he'd been carrying." Cade looked at the barn. "You've got records in there, physical records, because a man running an 11-year operation on a highway in rural Nevada doesn't trust digital. He keeps paper, names, dates, cargo manifests." He paused. "Proof." The yard was completely silent except for rain. "Bobby Mercer sent a letter," Cade said, "to an Iron Covenant member he'd met in a bar in Austin, Nevada about 14 months ago. About the same time Amber Reyes died on this road." He looked at Vaus. "My president got that letter 6 months ago. He's been holding it." A longer pause. "Tonight I find out the woman in the car is Bobby's daughter. That's not coincidence anymore." Elena's head was full of static. Her father in the bar in Austin. Her father talking to a biker. Her father who'd needed to tell her something. Her father who'd died before he could. Her father who'd known what this road was and what moved along it, and who had maybe, in the end, tried to do something about it. The man at the barn door shifted his weight. One of the men from the trucks had moved closer, half behind Elena's car now, and she clocked him in the mirror. The rifle was fully raised. The situation had the feeling of something about to become irrevocable, a pressure that you felt in your teeth, and Elena thought, Cade just told Vaus that there's a letter, that the Iron Covenant has documentation. He told him that on purpose. He's trying to change the math. Vaus looked at the barn, looked at Cade. "Your president," he said. "Where is he tonight?" "Writing," Cade said. "Here?" "He knows where I am." Another silence. Vaus was doing his own math. Elena could see it. The specific calculation of a man deciding whether eliminating the problem in front of him solved the larger problem or created a worse one. Whether a letter held by an Iron Covenant president became actionable upon Cade's disappearance, or whether it remained inert. Whether the nurse, knowing what she now knew, was a liability that had to be managed, or a complication that could still be contained. His calculation was taking too long. That meant the math was closer than he wanted it to be. Cade dismounted. He did it slowly, deliberately, both hands visible, swinging his leg over the Harley and planting both boots in the mud and straightening to his full height. He was taller than anyone else in the yard, and in the generator light, his shadow went in 4 directions at once, and he walked toward Vaus. Not fast, not threatening, just walking, hands at his sides. And the men around the yard tensed, and the rifle tracked him, and he didn't stop. "I want to see the barn," Cade said. "That's not... I want to see what Bobby Mercer carried, what he spent 2 years trying to figure out how to report." He stopped 4 feet from Vaus. Rain between them. "And then you and I are going to talk about what comes next." Vaus looked up at him. The height differential was significant, and Vaus didn't appear to find it comfortable, but he absorbed it with the practiced composure of a man who'd spent decades controlling situations he hadn't expected. You open that barn, Vaus said quietly, and there is no negotiation. There is no walking away. There is only what has to happen next. That door's already open, Cade said. It opened when Bobby Mercer sat down in a bar in Austin and wrote a name on a napkin. A long moment. Vaus nodded once. The man at the barn door stepped aside. Cade looked back at Elena's car. One look. Come, the look said, and she was out of the car before she'd decided to move, boots hitting wet mud, rain on her face, and she crossed the yard with her heart slamming against her sternum and fell into step behind Cade, and they walked into the barn together. The generator smell hit first. Gasoline and rubber and the particular closeness of powered machinery in an enclosed space. The light was 4 work lamps on stands, casting everything in orange-yellow overlapping pools, and the barn held 2 things. In the center, stacked wooden crates on pallets, 12 of them at least, secured with strapping and numbered with paint markers. And along the east wall, a folding table, metal chairs, a lockbox, a laptop, and a filing cabinet, 3 drawers, padlocked. Elena looked at the crates. What's in them? Cade looked at the filing cabinet. Documents, he said. But he was looking at the crates too, something moving through his face. She crossed to the nearest crate and looked at the paint-marked numbers. A sequence. And beside the sequence, small and stenciled, a date. Dates going back years. She touched the wood. It was dry inside, whatever the rain outside was doing. He drove this, she said. Her own voice surprised her. Steady, clinical. The ER voice. The voice that held when everything else was in free fall. My father drove whatever is in these crates. Yes, for 11 years. He started 4 years ago. Before that, it was other drivers. She turned and looked at him. You knew. When you saw my name, when you heard me say Ely. I knew the name, Cade said. I didn't know you. That's not the same thing as telling me. No, he said. It's not. She wanted to be angry. She was angry underneath everything in a place she didn't have time to access right now. She filed it the way she filed things during the worst ER shifts, in a compartment with a door that she'd open later, alone, when there was space for it. She filed it, and she looked at the filing cabinet, and she said, We need what's in there. Yes. Can you get it open? He was already moving toward the table, picking up a metal chair by its back, and he used the chair leg on the padlock. 2 hard strikes angled, the second one shearing the lock body, and the filing cabinet came open. The files inside were organized, meticulous. Dates, routes, cargo descriptions, names, driver names, some of them, and other names that meant nothing to Elena but that she understood, looking at the volume of paper, represented a network that went well past 6 men and a Nevada highway. This was not a local operation. This was a supply chain. She pulled files, looked at dates, looked at cargo notations that used codes she didn't know, but that were consistent, repeated, systematic. And then she found a name she recognized, not her father's name, a name she'd seen on a business card she'd been given 8 months ago, a name attached to a desk at the Nevada State Police Regional Office in Elko. A detective's name. A detective who'd taken her statement, not her statement, she'd never filed one, but Cade's, or the Iron Covenant's, who'd received reports about Route 50 and done what with them. She held up the file. Cade looked at it. His face did something she couldn't read. He's in your reports, she said. Yes. He's also in here. The silence had a different quality now. Vaus appeared in the barn doorway. He looked at the open filing cabinet, at the files in Elena's hands. Something behind his controlled expression shifted. Not panic, but the particular cold that settled over a man watching things move in a direction he'd spent years preventing. Detective Harlan Sue, Cade said. Not a question. Vaus said nothing. He got 3 Iron Covenant reports about this highway, Cade said. He forwarded one to the FBI contact in Las Vegas. The other 2 never made it anywhere. He looked at the file in Elena's hands. He's been carrying your paper for how long? Vaus looked at Cade with an expression that had become, finally, something honest. The expression of a man measuring distance and finding it too short. Long enough, Vaus said. Outside, rain on the barn roof, the generator humming, the men in the yard, waiting. Elena looked at the files, at the name, at 11 years of organized, meticulous documentation that Vaus had kept, because a man who'd been doing this for 11 years knew that the records were also leverage, that they implicated too many people for any single one of them to turn on the operation without taking themselves down with it. It was the structure of a trap that held from the inside. Her father had driven this road, had carried this cargo, had spent 2 years living in a one-bedroom apartment in Ely, smoking cigarettes, trying to figure out how to walk into a room and say what he knew without the room closing around him. And 4 days before he'd gathered enough to make that call, his heart had quit. Elena thought about the voicemail she'd gotten from the hospital in Ely. Natural causes. Cardiac event. Nothing suspicious. She thought about Vaus's immediate response when Cade had said her father's name. The too fast moment of recalibration. She looked up. "My father," she said. Her voice was still level. She needed it to stay level. 3 weeks ago. Vaus met her eyes. "Natural causes," she said. Vaus said nothing. "He called me 4 days before he died, said he needed to tell me something." Her hands tightened on the file folder. He'd been planning to tell someone. He'd written a letter to an Iron Covenant member 14 months ago. He'd spent 2 years building towards something. She held Vaus's gaze. And then he had a cardiac event. The barn was very quiet. "I am not going to accuse you of something I can't prove," Elena said. "Not out loud. Not right now." Her jaw was tight enough to ache. "But I'm going to take these files, and I'm going to leave this barn, and every person whose name is in these files is going to spend the rest of their lives explaining what they were doing on Route 50. Vaus looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at his men in the doorway, then at the yard beyond, then at something past all of them, at a future he'd been managing for 11 years that had just encountered a variable he hadn't planned for, a burned-out ER nurse from Reno holding a dead man's secrets in a Nevada barn, and a scarred biker standing beside her. "Take them," Vaus said. The relief that moved through Elena lasted exactly 1 second, because one of the men in the doorway, the one from the trucks, not the barn's regular guard, raised his phone and showed the screen to Vaus, and something on that screen made Vaus's expression close like a door slamming. "Holtz pulled the wire," the man said. "FBI's moving." Vaus looked at Cade, at Elena, at the files. "That changes things," he said quietly, and his hand went to his jacket pocket, and the men in the doorway moved inward, and Elena had a half-second to understand that the negotiation, the entire careful architecture of it, the offer, the counteroffer, the implied deal, had just become irrelevant because someone somewhere had just made a move that meant there was no version of this night that ended with witnesses walking out of this barn. Cade stepped in front of her. The single work lamp nearest the door swung in the draft from the opening barn doors, sending shadows wheeling across the walls. And in that lurching light, with 7 men closing in and no exits, and the rain hammering the roof, and her father's files in her hands, Elena Mercer made the only decision available to a person with no options left. She moved toward the thing coming at her instead of away from it, the way she'd learned to move toward the worst moments in the ER, and she threw the file cabinet drawer as hard as she could at the nearest work lamp, and the barn went half dark, and Cade was already moving in the dark, and somewhere outside, distant but growing, she heard something that didn't fit, a sound that rose above the rain, above the generator, above the men shouting in the sudden dark, the low, unmistakable rolling thunder of multiple Harley-Davidson engines, coming fast down the dirt road and getting louder. The first lamp went down hard, and the barn dropped into half dark, and Cade was already moving. He went left, not right, into the space between 2 pallets of crates, away from where the men expected him to go, and Elena understood the logic of it the way she understood triage logic. Don't go where they're looking, go where they have to turn to find you. She moved right, opposite him, the files clutched against her chest with one arm, her other hand finding the edge of a crate and using it to orient herself in the lurching shadow. The remaining 3 work lamps cast competing orange pools across the dirt floor, and the wooden walls and the whole barn pulsed with disorienting light and dark. Vaus's voice, controlled and flat even now. "Close it down." The men moved inward, 4 of them, fanning, the way men fanned who'd operated in enclosed spaces before. The 2 from the doorway, the guard from the trucks, and a 4th who'd come in from the yard while Elena hadn't been counting. The man with the rifle hadn't come in. Stayed outside, she registered, which meant outside was covered. Cade came off the pallets. He came at the nearest man from an angle, low, and the collision was brief and violent, and the man went sideways into the filing cabinet with a sound that shook the whole east wall, and Cade kept moving, kept using the crates as cover, and Elena moved along the west wall and found a gap between 2 work lamp stands and pressed herself into it and watched and breathed. The second man got to Cade from behind. He was big, the heaviest man in the yard, the one who'd carried the pipe earlier, and he got his arms around Cade's shoulders from behind and his weight went into it, trying to drive Cade down, and Cade dropped instead of fighting the pull. Dropped straight down, both knees on the dirt floor, letting the man's momentum carry him forward over Cade's lowered center of gravity, and the big man went over him and hit the dirt floor face first hard enough that Elena felt the impact through the soles of her boots. 2 seconds, 2 men down. Vaus had moved to the far end of the barn near the folding table, and he stood there watching with his hands still in his jacket pockets, and his expression was not panic, was not alarm. It was the expression of a man revising his timeline. He'd seen something he hadn't expected to see, which was a man who knew how to fight in closed spaces, and he was doing the arithmetic on it. The third man had stopped moving. He was between Elena and Cade, and he'd registered the speed with which 2 of his colleagues had gone down, and he was holding a tire iron that he'd produced from somewhere, and he was doing the same math Vaus was doing, but he was doing it faster and with more to lose personally, and his eyes went between Cade and the barn door. He chose the barn door. He broke for it, and Cade let him go, and Elena understood why. Because outside was where the rifle was, and whatever was coming down the dirt road needed the man with the rifle distracted by his own people moving unpredictably. The 4th man came at Elena. Not at Cade. At her. At the files she was holding. He crossed the barn in 4 strides, and she had no time to think, only react. And what she did was not what she'd planned, because she hadn't planned anything. She stepped into him the way she'd step into a patient in crisis, inside his reach, and she drove the heel of her hand into his chin and felt the impact shudder all the way up her forearm to her shoulder, and he staggered back. Not because it was a perfect strike, but because the surprise of it bought her 1 second. 1 second was enough. Cade was there. He came between them, and the fight lasted 3 seconds and ended with the man on the floor breathing through his mouth and blinking at the barn ceiling. Elena looked at her hand. It was shaking. She closed it into a fist and held it against her thigh and breathed. Outside, close now, very close. The sound of Harley engines had become something you felt in your chest as much as heard. Multiple engines, deep and rolling, and the rifle outside fired once. A single shot, no return fire, and then the engine sounds surrounded the barn completely, and she heard voices outside, the specific clipped overlapping communication of men who'd worked together long enough to operate without being told. Vaus was looking at the barn door. His composure hadn't shattered. That was the thing Elena kept noticing. It bent, but it didn't break, and that made him more dangerous than rage would have, because a man in rage made errors, and a man who remained composed when everything was collapsing around him was a man with something left in reserve. He looked at Cade. "The letter your president's holding," he said, "whatever Bobby Mercer wrote. It doesn't have the name." Cade looked at him. "The name you need is not in any letter. It's not in that filing cabinet." Vaus looked at the files in Elena's hands. "You have routes, cargo notations, driver names. Nothing that connects the cargo to a buyer, nothing that completes the chain." A pause. "I'm the only person alive who has that." "Then you're going to share it," Cade said, "in exchange for something." "You're not in a position to exchange anything." "I'm in a position to walk out of this barn and get in a vehicle before your people outside reach me, and drive to a location where I've maintained something called an exit package for 12 years. He looked at Cade steadily. Or I share the buyer's name and you have a case that doesn't go nowhere, the way your reports to the sheriff went nowhere, and the way your FBI contact went nowhere, because you'll have something that's above all of their heads. The barn door swung open. The man who came through it was not from Vous's crew. He was short, broad, wearing a cut that matched Cade's, the Iron Covenant skull and crown insignia. And his face was the face of someone who'd ridden hard and fast through desert rain and arrived ready to continue whatever the barn had started. Behind him, two more, then a fourth. They spread through the barn without being directed, reading the room, the men on the floor, Vous at the far end, Elena against the wall, Cade in the center, and they stopped and waited for Cade's read. Cade looked at the man in front. Rooster. You look like hell, Rooster said. He was maybe 45, a beard going gray, and his eyes went around the barn with the quick professional sweep of a man doing an assessment. How many outside? 7 in the yard originally, 4 in here, down. The one with the rifle. Did you? He's sitting against the building with a zip tie on his wrists and a headache. Rooster looked at Vous. This him? Gerald Vous. Rooster looked at Vous the way you looked at a thing you'd been looking for a long time. Not with triumph, with something quieter and harder. You know we have a letter, he said, from Bobby Mercer. I was just explaining to your man that the letter is incomplete. Yeah. Rooster reached into his jacket. He produced not a weapon, but a phone, and he held it up. Your detective, Harlan Sue. He's had a busy night. He looked at the screen. He made 4 calls in the last hour. 2 to a number that traces to your operation, 1 to the FBI field office in Reno. Not Las Vegas, Reno, different supervisor, one who hasn't been filing and forgetting. He put the phone away. And 1 to a number that goes to a law firm in Sacramento. He looked at Vous, the buyer's counsel. Vous's composure moved, just slightly, just enough. So panicked, Cade said, not to Rooster, to Vous. It appears so, Vous said, which means the buyer already knows something's happened tonight. Yes. Which means your exit package, Cade said, is already compromised, because whoever's at the end of that supply chain is cutting loose anything that connects them to it, and you're at the top of that list. The barn was very still. Elena watched Vous's face, watched the man who'd run an 11-year operation process the specific sensation of his leverage evaporating from both ends simultaneously. The Iron Covenant arriving from one direction, his own buyer cutting contact from the other, and a panicking detective in the middle who'd already made calls that couldn't be unmade. She thought about her father, sitting in that apartment for 2 years, understanding something similar, that there was no clean exit, that the network held because everyone in it was trapped by their knowledge of it, and that speaking up meant going down too. Her father had spent 2 years trying to find a way to tell the truth without the truth destroying him, and he'd run out of time. She looked at Vous. The buyer's name, she said. He looked at her. My father spent 2 years trying to figure out how to do the right thing, she said. He was in this long enough that he didn't know how to get out cleanly. I understand that. I deal with people who make bad decisions for understandable reasons every night I work. Her voice was steady, and she didn't know how. But someone on that road never made it home, and my father is dead. And there are names in those files of women who are somewhere they didn't choose to be. She held Vous's gaze. Give me the name. A long silence. Nathaniel Cord, Vous said. He operates through 3 shell companies registered in Nevada and Oregon. His primary counsel is the Sacramento firm, Deloitte Marsh Partners, not the financial firm, a separate entity using a similar name intentionally. He's moved cargo through this corridor for 9 years. 2 years before me. He looked at the filing cabinet. There's a ledger in the bottom drawer, behind the hanging files. It's not labeled. It's in a sealed envelope. He looked at Cade. That ledger has every transaction, every shipment, every name, every date. A pause. Including the federal official in the Las Vegas office above Holt, who's been ensuring the Bureau's interest in this region stays managed. Rooster was already at the filing cabinet. Outside the barn, Elena could hear voices. Iron Covenant members managing the remaining men from Vous's crew, the clipped exchanges of people controlling a situation that had tipped their way. She heard zip ties, heard a truck door closing, heard one of the Harleys idle down and cut. Rooster found the envelope, held it up. "That's enough to put Cord away," Vouse said, "and the federal official, and Sue." He looked at his hands. "And me." "Yes," Cade said, "I'm aware." Vouse looked at the floor for a moment, the first time he'd looked anywhere but at the people around him. "Bobby Mercer came to me," he said, 2 years ago. He said he wanted out. I told him the same thing I tell everyone who wants out." He paused. "You don't leave. You move to a different position. He moved to Ely. He stopped driving. He was supposed to be done." He looked at Elena. "I didn't touch your father. I want you to know that." Elena looked at him. "I want to believe that." "But you don't." "I don't know what I believe yet." She looked at the envelope in Rooster's hand. "But I'm going to find out." Cade crossed the barn and took the envelope from Rooster and looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Vouse. "Hands," he said. Vouse put his hands out in front of him, the gesture of a man who'd made his decision, or had it made for him, and had chosen to move through it with whatever was left of his composure intact. Rooster produced a zip tie. Vouse didn't resist. The barn door opened again, and a Fifth Covenant member came through, younger than the rest, and he looked at Cade and said, "State police are 18 minutes out. Rooster made the call coming in." "Which station?" "Winnemucca. Supervisor named Delray. Rooster's spoken with him before." Cade looked at Rooster. "Delray's clean," Rooster said. "Different jurisdiction from Sue. Different chain from the Las Vegas contact." He looked at the envelope. "We give him that tonight. Everything moves." Elena thought about 18 minutes, about what existed in those 18 minutes. The men in the yard, the ledger in the envelope, Vouse zip-tied in the corner of his own barn, and somewhere out there on Route 50, a highway that had been a killing corridor for 11 years that would, by tomorrow, be something different. She thought about her father's apartment, the cigarette smell, the stripped mattress, the 40 minutes she'd sat there doing nothing, waiting for something to break open inside her, and how nothing had. Something was breaking open now. She could feel it, not in her chest where she'd been waiting for it at the funeral, but lower, in her stomach, in the specific place where 9 years of triage and managed crisis and controlled professional response had built a wall that she'd needed tonight, and that was now, with the emergency technically over and 18 minutes of waiting ahead of her, beginning to crack. Cade looked at her. She looked back. He didn't say anything. He didn't offer anything. He just looked at her the way he'd looked at her from the beginning, with the specific direct attention of a man who didn't perform concern, just registered what was in front of him and responded to it. His knuckles were split. He had a cut above his left eyebrow that had bled down his temple and dried there in the barn's orange light. His jacket was soaked through and his boots were caked with mud, and he looked exactly like what he was, a man who'd been at this for 8 months and tonight had gotten further than any previous night and was feeling the specific exhaustion that came not from effort but from sustained tension finally releasing its grip. "Sit down," he said, to Elena. "I'm fine." "You're not." "I'm standing." "Sitting doesn't mean you're not fine," he said. "It just means you've been standing for a long time." She sat on the edge of a pallet of crates. Her legs thanked her. She hadn't known they needed to until she stopped using them. Cade sat on the pallet across from her. Not close, a respectful distance. He put his hands on his knees and looked at the barn floor and breathed, and for the first time since she'd seen him pull up behind her on the highway, she saw something in his face that wasn't control or assessment or the managed quiet of a man running a dangerous situation. Just exhaustion, just a person sitting down after a long time standing. "You knew who I was," she said, "before tonight. I knew the name, Mercer, Bobby's daughter, nurse in Reno. He'd mentioned you in the letter." A pause. "I didn't know you'd be on Route 50 tonight, but when you saw me, when you said Ely," he looked at his hands. "Yeah. And you didn't tell me." "No." "Why?" He looked up at her, the scar on his jaw, the dried blood at his temple. "Because you were already scared, and telling you that the man who'd spent 8 months investigating the highway your father had driven was the same man changing your tire in the rain wasn't going to help you drive." She looked at him. The logic of it was infuriating, and she understood it completely. "He was a good man," she said. Not about Cade. He knew it wasn't about him. Yeah, he said. The letter read like a good man. She looked at the files she was still holding. She'd held them through all of it, she realized, through the barn going dark, and the fight, and the arrival, and Vaus's surrender, held them the way you held the thing you came for when everything else was chaos. Her father's secret, the shape of his 2 years in Ely, the thing he'd needed to tell her. She'd gotten it. Not the way he'd intended to give it, not in a phone call on a Sunday, father to daughter, whatever careful words he'd found over 2 years of preparation. She'd gotten it in a Nevada barn at 2 in the morning in the rain, standing in the middle of the thing itself. She thought, he would have hated that. He would have hated that it happened this way. He would have wanted to protect her from exactly this, from the barn, from the highway, from the men in the trucks, and the name Gerald Vaus, and the specific cold discovery of what he'd carried. He'd spent 2 years trying to find a way to give her the information without the experience. She looked at the files. She looked at the envelope in Rooster's hand. Then she heard it. All of them heard it, from outside. Not the state police, not yet. Too soon for that. Something else. A sound that didn't belong to the barn or the Iron Covenant members in the yard or the trucks. A phone, ringing, from one of Vaus's men on the floor. The man on the floor, the one who'd gone down first, who was conscious now, sitting up against the crate pallets with his hands zip-tied in front of him, looked at the sound coming from his own jacket pocket, and his expression did something that Elena clocked immediately, involuntarily, the way she clocked things in patience. Fear. Not the managed, calculated fear of a man in a bad situation. The specific, deeper fear of a man who knew who was on the other end of that ringing. Cade looked at the phone, at the man. Cord, Cade said. The man didn't answer. He didn't have to. Nathaniel Cord is calling his people, Rooster said. He looked at Cade. To find out what happened here tonight, which means he knows something happened, Cade said. He doesn't know what. He looked at Vaus. So's call told him the situation was moving. This call is him trying to find out if he needs to run or if he can still manage it. Vaus looked at the ringing phone. If no one answers, he said, he runs, and he has the means to run very far. The phone rang again, 4th ring, 5th. Cade looked at Rooster. Something passed between them. The specific wordless communication of men who'd ridden together long enough that decisions happened in the space between. Rooster answered the phone. He said nothing, just answered and held it. 3 seconds of silence on the line, then a voice. They could all hear it in the barn's quiet, a measured voice, no accent, the voice of someone who'd spent years learning not to sound like anywhere. Status. Rooster said nothing. Another pause. Status. Rooster said, Route 50 is closed. The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then the call ended. Cade looked at Rooster. He'll run, Rooster said. He'll try. Cade looked at the phone, at the man on the floor, at Vaus, at Elena. He looked at the envelope with 11 years of transactions in it, and at the files in Elena's hands, and at the barn around them. The generator humming, the rain on the roof, 4 work lamps throwing orange light over the evidence of everything that had happened on this highway and everything that would need to happen next. We have 13 minutes, the younger Covenant member said from the door. 13 minutes before the state police arrived. 13 minutes in which Nathaniel Cord, somewhere in Nevada or California or further, was making calls of his own, burning contacts, moving money, closing the doors behind him one by one with the efficiency of a man who'd maintained an exit package for years and had just been told to use it. Cade stood up. The exhaustion left his face, not because it left him, Elena understood, but because he put it somewhere and picked up the other thing, the operational thing, and she watched the transition and recognized it because she made it herself every time she walked into the ER at the start of a shift. He looked at her. The envelope goes with the state police, he said. The files too. Everything you're holding. A pause. Your name goes on the chain of custody, yours and mine. That means I testify. Yes. She looked at what she was holding, at her father's handwriting, somewhere in these files. She hadn't seen it yet, hadn't looked closely enough, but it was there. She knew it was there, cargo logs and route confirmations in the handwriting of a man who'd needed to tell his daughter something and had run out of time to do it properly. "Okay," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Just looked. Then, "Rooster." "Yeah. Get the bikes off the dirt road before Delray arrives." Back on the highway, south side, "I don't want them in the yard when the state police roll in." He looked at the men on the floor. "Leave Vaus with 2 of ours for company. Everyone else outside." Rooster moved. The other Covenant members moved with him. The barn began to empty with quiet efficiency. No discussion, no debate. Just people who'd operated together long enough that the direction of a task was enough to set them moving. Elena stayed on the crate pallet. Cade stayed. 13 minutes, she said. 11 now. And Cord. He looked at the barn door, at the rain beyond it, at the highway that was out there somewhere in the dark, and the desert, and whatever was moving through it tonight in the aftermath of a phone call that had lasted 12 seconds and ended 11 years. "He won't make it far," Cade said. "How do you know?" He looked at her. There was something in his face that she hadn't seen before. Not quite certainty, not quite hope, but the specific expression of a man who'd been moving toward something for a very long time and had just arrived close enough to see the end of it. "Because this road's been closed for 11 years, he said, and tonight it finally opened." Outside, the rain was easing. Not stopping, easing, dropping from the sustained assault of the last 2 hours to something less total. A steady fall rather than a hammer, and in the slight reduction of its noise, Elena heard the highway in the distance, the empty desert highway, and she heard, very faint, growing, the sound of Harleys pulling south, moving off the dirt road and onto Route 50, the deep engine roll of them spreading across the dark, and in the distance in the opposite direction, still far away but coming, the first suggestion of state police sirens beginning their long approach through the Nevada night. 10 minutes. Vaus sat against the barn wall with his hands in front of him and said nothing. Elena looked at her father's files, and from the yard, one of the Iron Covenant members appeared in the barn doorway, breathing hard, rain-soaked, holding his phone up with an expression that shut the room down instantly. Not alarm, something different, something that landed on Cade's face like a physical blow and made Elena's stomach drop before she even heard the words. "Cord didn't run," the man said. Cade looked at him. "He's on the highway," the man said, "a mile east. He came to finish it himself." A pause. "And he's got Sue with him." The detective who'd buried their reports for 8 months, the man whose name was in Vaus's files, the man who, if he survived this night and reached a lawyer before the state police reached him, became the single most valuable piece of evidence in the case, and the single most dangerous loose end to every person currently in this barn. Cade looked at the envelope in Rooster's hand, looked at the door, looked at Elena. "Stay here," he said, and his voice had gone to somewhere below flat, somewhere quiet and absolute in the way that things went quiet right before they became irreversible, and he walked toward the barn door into the thinning rain, and the sound of a single Harley-Davidson engine turning over in the yard rose and steadied and moved, and Elena was on her feet before the sound had fully reached her, and she crossed to the door and stood in it and watched the single headlight move down the dirt road toward the highway, accelerating, the engine climbing through its registers until it hit the asphalt and turned east, and the sound became something you felt rather than heard, deep and rolling and going fast into the dark toward whatever was coming down Route 50 with a name and a phone call, and 9 minutes before the state police arrived to find whatever remained of the night Gerald Vaus had built over 11 years collapsing in on itself at last. The headlight disappeared east, and Elena stood in the barn doorway and counted seconds the way she counted seconds in the ER when a patient was coding and the defibrillator was charging. Not to measure time, but to stay inside it, to keep herself from going somewhere faster or slower than the present moment allowed. Rooster appeared beside her. He stood in the doorway with his arms at his sides and looked at the dark where Cade had gone, and his face held the expression of a man who'd watched someone he trusted ride into bad situations before and had learned that watching was sometimes the only available contribution. "How many with Cord?" Elena said. "2 vehicles. Sue's in one." Rooster paused. "Cord doesn't do things himself. He sends people. If he's here in person, it means what happens on this road tonight matters enough to him that he doesn't trust anyone else to finish it. Or he's cornered. Cornered men are the worst kind. Elena looked at the highway. The rain had dropped further, still falling, but thin now, more suggestion than assault. And in the thinning of it, the desert had acquired the specific gray-blue quality of the last hour before dawn, the darkness not lifting yet, but losing confidence. She could hear the sirens in the distance. Closer than 9 minutes now. 7, maybe less. He's got 7 minutes before the state police arrive, she said. Cade knows that. He went anyway. Cord's got Sue, Rooster said. Sue's a witness. A compromised one, but a live one. If Cord puts Sue somewhere between here and the highway before Delray's people arrive... He stopped. He didn't finish it because he didn't need to. Elena understood. A dead witness was a gap in the chain. Everything in the envelope, every name in the files, the ledger, all of it built a case to a point. And then the case needed a living voice to take it the rest of the way. Harlan Sue had spent 8 months burying Iron Covenant reports, and 8 years before that managing the state police's interest in this corridor. He was also the man who could walk into a courtroom and put Nathaniel Cord in a room with a specific set of transactions on a specific set of dates and say, I was there. I saw it. This is true. Sue alive was the case. Sue dead was a very good filing cabinet, and 11 years of paper that defense attorneys would spend 3 years arguing was fabricated. She was off the pallet and through the barn door before she told herself to move. Rooster said, Hey! She was already in the Camry. The engine turned over on the second try. She pulled a 3-point in the mud and got the car pointed back down the dirt road, and she drove. And the spare tire complained immediately about the uneven surface. And she drove anyway, and the headlights bounced through the scrub brush, and the rain came in diagonal lines across the beams. And behind her she heard Rooster saying something to someone, and then heard a motorcycle engine fire. The dirt road came out on Route 50, and she turned east without stopping. The highway was empty ahead of her. Wet asphalt reflecting her headlights back in a long pale streak. She pushed the Camry to 50 and felt the spares wobble in her hands and held the wheel steady against it and looked for headlights ahead. She found them half a mile out. 3 vehicles stopped on the highway. 2 facing west, Cord's, she assumed, and 1 sideways, angled across both lanes. And she knew that sideways vehicle before she was close enough to confirm it, because nothing sat on a road sideways like that unless it had come to a stop fast, and the Harley parked beside it confirmed the rest. She slowed, pulled up 50 yards back, her headlights illuminating the scene in front of her. Cade was out of the sideways arrangement. His motorcycle had gone perpendicular across the lanes as a roadblock, she understood, placed at speed and then ditched, and he'd come off it, and he was standing in the highway between his bike and the 2 vehicles ahead, and the rain fell on all of it, and for a moment nothing moved. Then a door opened. From the lead vehicle ahead, a dark SUV, engine running, a man got out. He was well dressed in the way that announced itself even at night in the rain, the coat, the posture, the way he moved with the controlled deliberateness of someone who'd spent decades in rooms where visible composure was currency. Nathaniel Cord. 60, maybe older, silver hair pushed back, and he walked around the front of the SUV and stopped 20 feet from Cade and looked at him. From the second vehicle, a state police cruiser, Elena realized with a sick drop, the driver's door opened and Harlan Sue got out. He was in plain clothes, not uniform, and his face, even from 50 yards, was the face of a man who'd been awake for the wrong reasons all night, carrying something too heavy for too long, and who was standing on a highway at 4 in the morning next to the man who'd owned him for years, trying to decide if there was still a version of this that ended differently. Cade looked at Sue. Sue looked at Cade. Cord said something Elena couldn't hear. Cade's response was audible even at 50 yards, clear in the thinned rain. It's over, Cord. Cord looked at him. You're one man on a highway. The state police are 4 minutes out. From Winnemucca. Cord's voice was measured, precise, unhurried. I have a 6-minute head start going south. Do the math. You called your man in the barn 20 minutes ago. He didn't answer. I answered. Cade looked at him. You came here anyway, which means you need something that's in that barn more than you need those 6 minutes. A silence. The ledger, Cord said. It's not in the barn anymore. Something moved through Cord's face, gone quickly. You're bluffing. Envelope left the property 8 minutes ago with a Covenant rider heading north to meet Delray's people halfway. Cade paused. Delray's been told what's in it. He's already called his supervisor in Carson City. You've got about 40 minutes before this stops being a state police matter and becomes something else entirely. Cord looked at the highway. At the dark south. He looked at Sue. Sue was looking at the ground. Harlan, Cord said. Sue didn't look up. Harlan. The name again, a different weight on it. Not a command, something closer to a reminder. You know what this means. You know what happens now. Sue looked up. His face in the SUV's headlights was the face of a man at the specific moment when the last door closes. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a person standing still while an internal architecture collapses quietly and completely. He'd spent 8 years managing the state police's blind spots on this corridor. He'd buried 3 Iron Covenant reports. He'd forwarded one to Las Vegas because not forwarding any of them had started to look more suspicious than forwarding one and ensuring it went nowhere. He'd taken money, and he'd taken access, and he'd built his career on a foundation that had just been handed to the man who was going to dismantle it. He looked at Cade. The women, Sue said. His voice was rough. The ones in the files, where they were taken. Cade looked at him. I have locations, Sue said. Not all of them. Some of them. From cargo manifests I kept copies of. He swallowed. In case I needed them. Cord said, Harlan. I kept copies, Sue said, not to Cord, to Cade. In case I needed something to negotiate with. If this ever... He stopped, started again. There are women who can be found if someone looks in the right places. The highway was silent except for rain. Amber Reyes, Cade said, 23 years old, drove this road 14 months ago. Sue closed his eyes, opened them. I don't know. I don't have that one. A pause that cost him something visible. I looked. After. I looked, and I couldn't find her. Cade looked at him for a long moment, a look that held everything the Iron Covenant had done for 8 months on this highway. Every night ride, every rotation, every report that had gone into the dark and returned nothing. A look that held Amber Reyes's grandfather in a town called Ely, and a prospect who'd been carrying something that had no bottom. Give me the copies, Cade said. Sue reached into his jacket and produced a folded envelope, thick, letter-sized, folded twice, and held it out. His hand was shaking. Not from cold. Cord moved. He didn't move toward Cade. He moved toward his SUV. Fast. Faster than Elena expected from a man his age. The specific speed of someone who'd been managing exits for 12 years and knew exactly how many seconds he had. And he was reaching the door handle before Cade had closed half the distance between them, and Elena, still 50 yards back in the Camry with the engine running, did the only thing immediately available to her. She floored it. The Camry accelerated hard for 50 yards, and Elena held it as long as she dared and then stood on the brakes, and the car skidded on wet asphalt and came to rest angled across the highway 6 feet from Cord's SUV, close enough that the SUV's front door couldn't open fully, and Cord was standing between his door and the car's side panel in a gap that was 18 inches wide and entirely inadequate. He looked at her through the windshield. She looked back. She had her hands on the wheel and her foot ready to move back to the accelerator, and she held his gaze through the rain-wet glass, and she thought of her father in his apartment and the voicemail she'd missed and everything her father had carried for 2 years on a road exactly like this one, and she did not move the car. Cord looked at the highway south, looked at the Camry, at Cade approaching from behind, at Sue standing in the rain with the envelope in his hand and the expression of a man who'd already landed somewhere irreversible, at the dark where 6 minutes of head start had existed 30 seconds ago and no longer did. He put his hands up. It was a small gesture. Both hands just above his waist, palms out. Not dramatic. The gesture of a man who'd done his math and arrived at a result he didn't like and was moving to the next problem, which was survival in a different form. Lawyers, jurisdiction, the particular machinery of a man with resources constructing a defense. He was already somewhere else, Elena realized, even as he stood in the rain with his hands up. Already 3 moves ahead, but he was in the rain with his hands up, and he wasn't going south. The sirens arrived 4 minutes later, 3 state police vehicles coming west on Route 50 with lights running, and they found a Camry crosswise in the highway, a Harley-Davidson lying on its side 30 yards back, 2 men standing in the rain with their hands visible, 1 man on his knees in the wet asphalt with his wrists pressed together in the posture of a person waiting for handcuffs, and a woman in a wet coat sitting on the hood of her father's old car holding a file folder against her chest, watching. Sergeant Delray was 50-ish, broad, with the specific unhurried competence of a state police supervisor who'd spent 20 years not being surprised by what he found on Nevada highways. He got out of the lead vehicle and looked at the scene in front of him and looked at Cade, who'd moved to stand beside the Harley, and said, "Grim. Delray. You want to tell me what I'm looking at?" "Nathaniel Cord," Cade said, on his knees. "Harlan Sue standing, he's cooperative. Gerald Vouse is in a barn 2 miles back on a ranch road, zip-tied, with 2 of my people for company." He looked at Elena. "She has files. Sue has additional documentation. Locations." He looked at Delray. "The envelope is with Reaper. He should be 20 minutes north of you." Delray looked at Cord on his knees, looked at Sue, looked at Elena on the hood of the Camry. "Anyone hurt?" he said. "Nothing permanent," Cade said. Delray nodded once. The nod of a man who understood he was standing at the edge of something much larger than a Route 50 call, and who was filing that understanding for later and handling what was directly in front of him first. He gestured his officers forward. They moved with efficiency, 2 to Cord, 1 to Sue, calmly and without drama. Cord went without resistance. He straightened from his knees and walked to the state police vehicle and got in, and his face through the window was already composed, already somewhere past this moment, and Elena watched him go and felt nothing clean. Not relief, not satisfaction, not the resolution that movies told you arrived at moments like this. Just the specific, complicated texture of something ending that had cost more than it should have, and that would continue costing in ways that wouldn't be visible tonight. She looked at the envelope in her hands, her father's road. Sue came to stand near her before his officer reached him. He stopped 3 feet away and looked at the files she was holding, and his face did something difficult and unresolved. "He wasn't a bad man," Sue said. "Bobby Mercer. I want you to know that." His voice was rough, the voice of a man using his last credible words carefully. "He drove the road because he needed the work. He didn't know what he was carrying for the first year. By the time he knew—" A pause. By the time he knew, the knowing was dangerous enough that walking away was as much of a risk as staying. Elena looked at him. "He never hurt anyone," Sue said. "He drove cargo. He didn't ask questions he already knew the answers to, and when he stopped being able to live with that," he swallowed. "He tried to find a way out that didn't destroy him, and he ran out of time." "I know," Elena said. "I'm sorry," Sue said. Not performatively. Just flatly, the way you said a thing you meant and knew wasn't adequate, and said anyway because the alternative was silence. The officer reached him, and he turned and went. Elena sat on the hood of the Camry, with the rain coming down soft now, almost finished, and the highway around her filling with the blue-red pulse of state police lights, and she didn't move for a while. Cade came and stood beside the car. Not on the hood, on the ground, leaning against the front panel, close enough to talk, far enough to be appropriate about it. He'd picked up a rag from somewhere and had been using it on his hands, and the cut above his eyebrow had stopped bleeding and dried again, and he looked the way a person looked at 4 a.m. after a night that had been too long in every direction. "Rooster's bringing the bikes south," he said. "They'll meet us at the diner in Frenchman." She'd forgotten about the diner. The lonely roadside diner she'd been driving toward when this all started. Reno, 4 hours. 4 hours that had somehow become an entire night on a road that wasn't supposed to be hers. "How far?" she said. 20 minutes. She looked at the highway. At Route 50, stretching west in the last of the rain, gray and flat and ordinary looking in the state police lights. Just a highway, just asphalt and desert, and the suggestion of distance. "My father drove this road," she said. "Yes." "For 4 years. Twice a week sometimes," the manifest said. She looked at the files. "I was in Reno. He was 2 hours away driving a cargo route on the loneliest highway in America. She paused. He never told me. He was trying to protect you from knowing. I know that. She looked at her hands, at the files. I'm a nurse. I spend every shift watching people try to protect the people they love from knowing things. She turned the file folder over in her hands. It never works. The knowing always comes. It just comes in the worst possible way when you try to prevent it. Cade looked at the highway. He wrote the letter 14 months ago, she said. He'd been building toward telling someone for a year before that. And then 3 weeks ago he called me. She looked at the sky, at the clouds beginning to separate in the east, the first hairline fracture of approaching dawn in the cloud cover over the desert. He said he needed to tell me something. I said Sunday. Cade didn't say anything. I said Sunday, she said again. Not to him, to the air, to the highway, to the particular specific regret that didn't have a recipient. She sat with that for a moment. Then she got off the hood of the car. Let's go to the diner, she said. The diner in Frenchman was called the Sage Stop, and it had been there since 1971, and it looked it. Windows fogged from the inside with the heat of coffee urns and a grill that hadn't been off in decades, neon sign in red and yellow with the S flickering intermittently, a gravel lot with spaces for 18-wheelers that were mostly empty at this hour. The kind of place that was nobody's destination and everybody's rest stop. That smelled like coffee and bacon grease and the specific tired warmth of rooms that never fully closed. The Iron Covenant arrived before Elena did. 6 motorcycles in the lot when she pulled in. Harleys lined up with the particular orderliness of men who took care of the things they depended on. Not precious, not performative, just exact. 6 riders inside at the long counter, and 2 booths, still in their cuts, leather jackets dripping onto worn wooden floors, and the woman behind the counter, late 50s, seen everything, currently pouring coffee into mugs without being asked because this was the kind of diner where you read the room and acted accordingly, was doing so with the specific efficiency of someone who'd had bikers in her establishment before and had no particular feelings about it either way. Elena walked in. 6 men looked at her. Not predatory, not suspicious. The specific attention of people who knew what she'd been through in the last 4 hours and were registering her arrival as a fact that mattered. Rooster was at the first booth. He looked up when she came in and nodded once, the nod of a man who'd been worried without advertising it and was now filing the worry under resolved. She sat at the counter. The woman with the coffee poured her a mug without asking. It was the best thing anyone had done for her all night. She wrapped both hands around it and let the heat come into her palms, and she breathed. Cade came in 3 minutes later. He'd parked outside and she'd heard his engine cut and heard his boots on the gravel and then on the diner's wooden steps. He came in and looked around the room. Inventory, automatic. And came to the counter and sat 2 stools down from her, not beside her, 2 stools down. And the woman poured him coffee without being asked, and he wrapped his hands around it the same way Elena had. For a while nobody talked. The grill started up somewhere in the back. Someone had ordered, or the cook had decided that people who looked like this needed feeding regardless of ordering, and the smell of bacon joined the coffee smell and the rain smell coming off wet leather jackets, and the diner's fluorescent lights hummed their particular frequency above all of it. Rooster came to the counter with his mug. He sat on the stool between Elena and Cade, which Elena registered as deliberate, not separating them, just occupying the space naturally, the way a person did when they were used to being the one who held the middle ground. Delray called, he said. They've got vows processed, cords being transported to Reno, Sham, federal jurisdiction. The Carson City supervisor invoked it before they'd had him 20 minutes. He turned his mug in his hands. Sue's cooperating. He's talking about the locations. A pause. There may be women who come home because of tonight. Elena looked at her coffee. An amber, Cade said. Not a question. Just the name, placed carefully. Rooster was quiet for a moment. Sue didn't have her location, but what Sue's giving them opens distribution records that go 3 years back. The people running the investigation in Reno think... He stopped. Restarted. They think it's possible. Cade looked at his mug. Possible is something, Elena said. Yeah, Rooster said. It's something. One of the other Covenant members, the younger one, the one who'd done the door timing in the barn, came to the counter and set something beside Elena's coffee mug without speaking. An envelope. Not the ledger envelope, a different one, white, standard, slightly crumpled, with her name on the front in handwriting. She knew the way you knew handwriting that had appeared on your birthday cards for 30 years. Her father's handwriting. She looked at it. It was in the files, the young writer said, tucked in the back of the last folder, addressed to you. He looked at Cade. Cade said to give it to her when she'd had a minute. She looked at Cade. He was looking at his coffee. She picked up the envelope, turned it over. The seal was intact. Her father had licked it closed, and it had stayed closed through however many months it had been sitting in a filing cabinet in a Nevada barn, waiting. She thought about that. About a man who'd put a letter in a filing cabinet with his daughter's name on it, in a place where, if anything happened to him, it might eventually be found. Not a plan exactly. More like a hope. The specific irrational hope of a person who's run out of rational options. She didn't open it. Not here. Not with 6 bikers and a diner counter and fluorescent lights. She held it in both hands the way she'd held the coffee mug, and she let herself feel the weight of it, which was not the weight of paper, but the weight of 2 years of her father sitting in a 1-bedroom apartment trying to find the words for something he'd spent 4 years being complicit in and 1 year trying to undo. She put it in her coat pocket, later, somewhere quiet. She'd read it when she had the room for it. The food arrived. Nobody had ordered specifically. The cook had made a decision, which turned out to be eggs and toast and bacon and hash browns, enough for everyone at the counter and both booths, brought out by a teenager who'd apparently been asleep in the back and had been woken for the purpose, and who moved through the room with the half-awake efficiency of someone doing a job they knew well. They ate. It was the most ordinary thing Elena had done in 4 hours, and it was also, unexpectedly, the most profound. The specific human ordinariness of food and warmth after cold and fear. The way the body asserted its basic requirements regardless of context. The way the room had transformed from a collection of people who'd been through something together into something that felt, briefly, like a gathering. The Covenant members ate without ceremony. They talked in the low, overlapping way of people comfortable enough with each other that conversation didn't require maintenance. The woman behind the counter refilled mugs without being flagged down. The grill in the back continued its work. Elena ate her eggs and thought about her father. She thought about him driving this road. Not as a villain, and not as a victim, as a person who'd made a decision for understandable reasons and had spent 4 years living inside the consequences of it, and 2 years trying to find his way back to being the person his daughter had believed he was. She thought about the apartment in Ely, the cigarettes, the stillness, a man sitting with a secret that was also a sin, trying to figure out if there was a path back from it that didn't destroy everything. He hadn't found the path, but he'd pointed someone else toward it. He'd sat in a bar in Austin, Nevada, and talked to a biker he'd never met before, and after that conversation, he'd gone home and written a letter. And 14 months later, the letter had reached the right person, and 8 months after that, the right person had been on Route 50 on the right night, and her father was dead, and she was in a diner in Frenchman at 4:30 in the morning with 6 motorcycle club members eating eggs that nobody had ordered, and the thing her father had been trying to do was done. Imperfectly. Incompletely. At a cost she was going to be paying for a long time, but done. Cade set his fork down. He picked up his coffee mug and held it and looked at the window. The fogged glass and the dark outside and the gravel lot and the lined-up Harleys visible through the condensation. "I was going to ride back east tonight," he said. Not to anyone specifically. Just said it, the way you said something you'd been holding. "After the patrol. I do the eastbound leg, come back through Frenchman, keep going. There's a stretch past Austin where the road goes straight for 11 miles, and at night with no traffic you can open it up and it's..." He paused. "It's the only time my head goes quiet." Elena looked at him. "My head's quiet right now," he said. Not explanation, just a fact, delivered with the same flatness he used for everything. She looked at his profile. The scar. The cut above his eyebrow that had dried brown. The set of his jaw that was different from how it had been on the highway. Not relaxed exactly, but resting, the specific quality of a face that had put down a weight it had been carrying for a specific number of months and was still adjusting to the change. 8 months, she said. "Yeah. Amber's brother. The prospect. His name's Danny. Cade looked at the window. He's 21. He joined the Covenant 3 months after she disappeared. He said he wanted to be around people who were looking. A pause. He rides the westbound leg. We set it up so we never overlap. He goes west, I go east, and when we pass each other at the midpoint, we don't stop, just nod. He turned the mug in his hands. Every night for 8 months. Elena thought about that. 2 men on a highway at night, moving in opposite directions, passing each other in the dark without stopping. A specific kind of vigil. The kind that didn't announce itself. You'll have to tell him, she said. About tonight. About Sue's cooperation and what it might mean. I know. That's a hard conversation. Most of the ones that matter are. He looked at her. You know that. She did. Outside, the sky was changing. The cloud cover that had held all night was breaking east. Not dramatically, not with color yet, just the first thinning of the dark, the suggestion that the sky had a depth to it beyond cloud, that somewhere above the weather the sky was doing what it always did regardless of what happened below it. Rooster paid. Elena didn't see him do it. By the time she looked up, he'd already settled with the woman at the counter, some quiet transaction, and he was coming back with the receipt folded into his jacket pocket and the expression of a man who'd crossed an item off a list. The Covenant members began to gather. Jackets straightened, mugs drained, the low-key assembly of people who were about to go somewhere. Elena looked at Cade. The Camry, she said. The spare's not going to make Reno. He nodded. There's a tire place in Fallon that opens at 6. It's 40 minutes west. He reached into his jacket. He put money on the counter beside her mug. Folded bills, not counted in front of her, just placed. For the tire. She looked at the money. Looked at him. Don't, he said. I wasn't going to argue. People usually argue. I'm a nurse, she said. I know what it costs to refuse help when it's offered. I learned that a long time ago. She looked at the bills, then at him. Thank you. He looked at her with those still dark eyes, and in them, for just a moment, in the diner light, with the eggs and the coffee and the wet leather and the dawn coming through the fogged window, was something that wasn't control or assessment or the managed distance he'd carried all night. Something simpler than that. The look of a person who'd been carrying something for 8 months and had found, in the course of a night he hadn't planned, that the weight had been shared without him asking, and that the sharing had made it different. Not lighter, different. Keep saving people, he said. In the ER. She looked at him. That's what you do, he said. It matters. She thought about telling him what ER nursing actually looked like from the inside. The 12-hour shifts, the under-resourcing, the cases that came back twice and 3 times because the systems outside the hospital didn't hold. She thought about telling him that saving people was considerably more complicated than it sounded, and considerably less complete. She thought about telling him that most nights she drove home uncertain whether what she'd done had been enough. She looked at him instead and said, So does riding a highway at night for 8 months. He nodded once. Outside, the Harleys started. One by one, the specific deep roll of each engine finding its idle, and the sound came through the diner's walls and windows, resonant and layered, 6 distinct machines producing something that together was more than the sum of its parts. Not noise, not threat, but presence. The specific presence of people who decided what they were going to do and were doing it. Cade stood. He put on his jacket. He looked at Elena once more. Route 50, he said. You ever drive it again? I'll honk, she said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. In the direction of one. He walked out. She heard his engine start. Heard it join the others. Heard the lot fill with the sound of them moving. Not fast, not urgent, just moving, the way things moved when they were heading somewhere specific and the distance was known and there was no reason to hurry and no reason to stop. She sat at the counter with her hands around the last of her coffee, and she listened to the sound of them go. First the lot, then the highway, the sound traveling west on Route 50 and spreading out in the gray pre-dawn air until it was larger than the road and then larger than the desert around it, filling the space between the earth and the breaking sky with something that sounded from the inside of a warm diner, like what it was. Men who'd found each other in the aftermath of things that hadn't healed, riding together through the last of the dark, toward whatever the road gave back. The woman behind the counter took Elena's empty mug without asking and refilled it. Elena put her hand on her coat pocket, on the letter inside it, on her father's handwriting and 2 years of effort and the specific weight of someone who'd tried to do the right thing and hadn't quite made it and had left what he could. It would be enough. She didn't know that yet. She would know it later, months later, in a courtroom in Reno, watching a case built from a dead man's records and a biker's 8 months, and a detective's confession take on the specific grinding life of justice that wasn't clean and wasn't fast and wasn't what movies showed you, but was real and was moving and was going to land somewhere that mattered. She didn't know any of that yet. She knew the coffee was hot. She knew the window was fogging, and through the fog the sky outside was going from black to deep blue at its eastern edge, the first color change, the desert horizon beginning to separate from the sky above it. She knew the sage stop smelled like the best version of everywhere she'd ever waited out a bad night. She knew her father had driven the road outside this window for 4 years and had sat, maybe, in this diner, maybe on this stool, drinking coffee out of a mug like this one, and looking at the window and thinking about what he was going to do. She picked up the mug. Outside, the sky kept going from dark to almost dark to something that was neither, that particular threshold between night and morning when the world didn't know yet which way it was going to fall. Then it fell toward light. And Route 50 stretched west in the growing gray, empty and straight and long, the loneliest road in America, looking in the early dawn like exactly what it had always been and what it would remain, just a road, running through the desert, waiting to see who came down it next.